Hey guys, how's it going today? What I got going on here today is I'm going to show you guys a little bit about what I do to get an old lathe running that maybe has been sitting around for a while, or you bought and has been not maintained to the standards that you would probably like. So I'm just going to show you a few things that you might want to do to, if you pick up an old lathe, to clean it up and oil it up and get her going. So hang tight. Alright, so the first thing I always do when I get a lathe and I get it down and I get it to where I want it to be is check out, obviously you check this thing out and you kind of should have an idea already of, the condition of it and the wear and everything else. First thing I do is I always have some quadruple zero 4/0 steel wool, and you can get some Croil or oil or whatever, and just go along here and brush these ways down. With the steel wool, it might take a little time, but you can get, if you got like some rust spots and stuff, you can get in there and wipe them off and clean these up and just clean them down to the bare metal. And then you get your paper towel and you wipe them off. And then what you want to do is make sure, there's a few guys on eBay and stuff that sell oil for these machines specifically. What I have here is whey oil. So you just dump some whey oil on there, get it nice and thick, and wipe everything down and leave a nice little coat of oil on there. So that is step one. Alright, step two. I always take a look at all the drive gears and every gear on this machine. What I usually do is get in here with like a toothbrush or something, and like this lathe that sat in a wood shop for many years, and just get in there and clean most of this gunk out of there, because what happens is those gears, they get grimed up and full of sawdust, and a lot of people like to put grease on these for some reason, which isn't the correct thing to do. It's supposed to use like a light, I believe like a 20 weight non-detergent oil, and like I said, you can get that off of eBay in smaller quantities. So yeah, just go through and make sure that all these gears are nice and clean. I kind of went a once over on these. These were much dirtier when I started. I'll probably clean them up a little bit more, but make sure these are all clean and not gunked up. And then once you get them cleaned kind of to where you like them, put a little bit of that light 20 weight oil. I believe your machine might even say it might have a lubrication spec on your thing here. But yeah, clean them and oil them and you're good to go. And then also, up here, take these covers off if you got a 9A or even a 10. A lot of South Bends are similar. Take these covers off and do the spindle gears and then the bowl gear too. Next item, the lead screw. A lot of times these lead screws get caked full of grease and chips and all sorts of crap. So what you can do there is also, if you got a toothbrush or a wire brush, you can go through here and just run it along. Or if your lathe is running and you're fairly confident that all your gears and all that outboard stuff is good to go, you can spin this and just run your brush all the way along here while this is spinning. Be careful not to let it get caught in there, and you can clean this out and make sure your lead screw is fairly clean. Alright, what are we on, step 4, I believe? The next thing you want to do, a lot of lathes that have clutches and stuff in them, South Bends and Logans, they're all pretty similar of this era. You might want to, there's a plug down at the bottom here. Pull that plug. Hopefully oil will drain out of there. If not, that's okay, but you always want oil in there. This thing is designed to have oil in the reservoir. So drain it if there's anything in there. If not, plug it back in, and you can put a little Teflon tape on that plug down there. And then there's a little cap right over here. Put some, I believe they call for 20 weight non-detergent. Same thing again, you can get it on eBay for these machines, and fill that up until this cap is full. So make sure you got oil in your clutch. Next step, I always take your threading dial off. If you're going to be using your threading dial, take that off and make sure your gear on your threading dial is clean of all gunk and chips and everything, because you don't want that you know, getting caught up in here, and it'll cause excessive wear on your gear. These gears are designed to wear before the lead screw does. So, and these gears are not really the cheapest thing to come by. I think actually you can get a lead screw cheaper than you can probably get a gear. But make sure that that gear is clean, and then you can also oil up here. There's a spot for oil. Alright, what are we on? 6? So then I move over to the cross slide and the compound. And a couple things you can do here is there's jib screws on the side here. If it's really, really tight, you can loosen those up. But first thing you do before you want to mess with those jib screws is oil this stuff up. So what you can do is you can, a lot of times this dial will bind on this collar. So you can just put a little oil right on top here, work this thing back and forth a few times, because they usually, you know, they're easy to unscrew because they loosen up and then they tighten down up against this collar, so it gets a little tougher. But if you get some oil in between these two, it'll usually go a little easier. And then also with the compound, crank it all the way back. Here's some whey oil. So I put it in the dovetails here, and then just work this thing. See, this one's pretty tight right now, but we can crank it all the way forward. And then once you get it all the way forward, you can come in the back side here and put a little bit of whey oil on each dovetail here and work this thing back and forth a few times. And then there's also a spot up here to put like some 20 weight or spindle oil or something in there on that screw. So once you oil these things up, they usually loosen up quite a bit. So you don't always want to use these adjustments before you oil them. So oil first, and then if you still don't like it, you can adjust them a little bit. And the same thing on the cross slide. If you can see here, I oiled the crap out of this one already. So you crank this one all the way out, and it'll usually, you can crank these all the way off, but you crank it all the way out, put oil here, make sure they're clean first. If you need some steel wool or something, get in there and then wipe it off, make sure you don't have any steel particles in there. And then oil it. I oil on top here just because that's not really wear surface up here, but it does, you don't want it to rust or anything, so just you put some oil on there. So put it on the back, run it all the way forward and back, and the same thing on the back side here. You can put some oil back in the ways there. And also same thing here, some oil in between the micrometer collar and the, whatever you call this, the other collar. So that usually loosens them up pretty good. So there we go. So we got our cross slide and our compound oiled. Next thing I would do is make sure your whey wipers are clean and free of debris. And then you can also get in there with some whey oil, and sometimes you can put a gob, you know, right on your whey, and then crank this thing over. Make sure those things suck up what they can. You can also buy replacements of these on eBay. They're really cheap. I think this is a 9-inch South Bend. I think you can get them for 15 or 20 bucks, which is really cheap insurance to make sure that your wheys don't wear, so you don't get unnecessary chaff and, you know, just metal particles under there grinding between your saddle and your wheys. That's why these are there. You don't want unnecessary wear. So that's cheap insurance if you want new wipers, and they're really easy to replace. You just pop a screw out there, take the old one off, put it in, there you go, you're done. It's like literally a 5-minute job to fix that, and it's cheap insurance. Alright, so what are we on, 7 or 8? So what I did with this lathe, and I'm not really going to zoom in here because I hate my camera's zoom, but these dials were all, you know, rusty and nasty, and they get kind of old. So a way to fix that and make them a lot more visible, like they're nice and shiny now, and I can see all the numbers, all the letters, and zero marks are nice and crisp and clean. Here is some 320 grit Emery cloth. And what I did is, you know, I usually get this in about an inch wide strip. So I tore it in half, so you're left with about a 1/2 inch strip. And then you can come in here on these dials and polish these guys up. Just back and forth, back and forth. And at first when you're using 320, it'll leave some scratches in there, but the more you use it and the more you polish, it'll actually start to polish it. So you can see this piece is, there's not much left to it. And so actually when you're running it now, it actually starts to polish it because a lot of that 320 grit is actually worn away. So then we're left with a nice sheen on your dial and your collar here, so you can actually read that. So I did that here on the compound and here on the cross slide, and now I got really good visual cues, and I can actually see what's going on here instead of trying to squint and read a rusty dial. And then also these knobs here, they were a little rusty too, so I did the same thing here. I went in here and just polished them a little bit, and you can spin it around and do the top, and it gets a little tricky because they move around, and then the ends get a little tricky too, but a little bit of work, and you can get them nice and shiny. They spin easier in your hand versus like a rusty old nasty one. And then after you get done shining and polishing all this stuff, put a little oil in there, make sure it doesn't rust. That's pretty much all I did for the saddle assembly here. The last thing you need to do, of course, is all the little gits here and all the oiler spots. Make sure you go through and put the proper oil in there, make sure everything's topped off, and you're good to go. Alright, this lathe has the quick change gearbox. Not all of them do. A lot of you guys out there might have just an old Craftsman or Logan or South Bend like this that have the change gears, which is fine. But if you have a quick change like this, it's a good idea to get a flashlight and look underneath here and check out and see, do you got a bunch of crap in there? Do you got a bunch of metal chips? You got a bunch of sawdust, whatever? If you do, it might not be a bad idea to take this whole assembly off and flip it over and clean it out with a toothbrush and some very, very mild, you can use like diesel fuel, actually works pretty good because that won't take the paint off. You can get some very mild water-based detergents, but sometimes you got to watch out. Some of that stuff like Purple Power and even Simple Green will, if you leave it in here long enough, it'll take your paint off, or it'll take the sheen down, so you're left with a weird looking color in your paint. Diesel fuel works pretty good, and let me think, very, very light lacquer thinner, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but diesel fuel I know will work for sure, and it's relatively cheap. To take that off, it's just 1, 2, 3 screws. You take this guard off here, which is 2 flathead screws, take the banjo off and the gears, and if you take these 3 screws out, you can slide this whole assembly out from your saddle assembly, and then you can flip it over and clean it. If you look under there and it looks fairly clean, and there's not a lot of gunk and crap under there, you can just say it's good and live with it. And then what you want to do is make sure you dump oil in this thing. There's a grease hole there. Some of the larger lathes have several oil ports, gits. So you just want to make sure that everything is well oiled. Move up here to the headstock. Once again, this is your spindle oil. You want to make sure you get spindle oil for that and make sure that it is in a good shape. And I don't think, let me think, there is a spot here on your cone pulley to put oil in. Some of them say grease, but I've never used grease on the South Bends, and grease kind of scares me, but I know if you get the right grease, South Bend recommends a specific grease. Don't just use any grease. Look it up. But you can put some spindle oil in there, and that'll lubricate between your spindle and your cone pulley. Alright, there's also, if you look on some of your outboard gears here, I'll flip over to the side here and I'll show you some of these oil spots to hit on your outboard gears here. Alright, so here is your outboard gears, and your lathe might be a little different, but if you got a South Bend 9, it should be pretty similar. These little holes here on these tumbler gears, on the shaft here, that is made to put a little oil in there. In these shafts there's little oil wicks that keep these gears lubricated, so just pop a little oil in there. Also, I believe there is on your tumbler lever here. There's a couple holes back on the side here, and you can oil those up too. I believe those are the only 3 oiling points on this machine. Like I said, be sure to put a little bit of light oil on your gears too before you start it up. Alright, what are we on, like step 12? Okay. There's a few things, you know, you gotta make sure you want to get all this stuff right before you crank these guys up, especially after they've been sitting for a while. Alright, so here is on this lathe, your back drive assembly. And with a lot of these south bends, they're all pretty similar that have these back drives. You got 2 oil gits here, and that again uses spindle oil. And you just want to make sure these things usually aren't too bad, but make sure they spin freely, and probably a good idea to put some oil in here and just turn it by hand a few times. Make sure some of that oil gets in there before you start it up, because if it's been sitting for several years and you haven't run it yet, and you crank that thing over, you know, you don't want to gull anything. Although there's usually oil left in there from even 30 years ago, but you want to just make sure that you got oil in there before you crank it up full speed. Same thing, I won't show down below here, but sometimes some of these old motors, they got the oil gits on the bearings on the end of the motors. So just get some motor oil, actual motor oil, not car motor oil. I'm talking electric motor oil. They're completely different. Electric motor oil is really thin and very light viscosity. So put that in your bearings if you need it, if you have an older motor. Another thing you just want to double check when you're going over your machine is make sure all your electrical connections are good. This machine has some pretty old wire, but everything looks good. Nothing's frayed, nothing's broken. This conduit here is in pretty good shape, and it's securely fastened into the motor, and my plug looks good and everything. So that's just one more thing to make sure that you know, you don't want electrical shortage or anything, or worst case scenario, fire and burn your house or your shop down. So make sure all your electrical is good to go. Alright, lost count of steps, but hopefully you've gotten a tailstock with your machine. It's kind of limits your ability if you don't, so make sure you get a tailstock. I always slide these things off, and they slide off pretty easy. And just go through, and probably a good idea, I haven't done it yet on this one, but let's see. This is not the greatest tool for this, but a light awl or something, and just get in here. A lot of times, if you can see that, I got a bunch of crap stuck in the middle of the V-ways here. So you can get in there and kind of just lightly scrape that stuff out of there, because a lot of times it's caked full, and that's just one more thing that you don't want in there. Like up here is a bunch more. And we're not scraping the way surfaces here, we're just this little channel at the bottom here. And same thing on this side. You just want to make sure that's all clean, and you can get a razor blade too and scrape some of this edge stuff off. It really doesn't matter, you just want to make sure that it's nice and clean. And you can get like some acetone or some lacquer thinner and wipe those down, make sure they're nice and clean. And then after you got them nice and clean, pop it back on and you're good to go. Alright, tailstock. What you want to do here is, first off, you can pull this thing out and maybe put a little dab of light spindle oil or something in your lock here. That'll make that function a little better. Also, here's an old live center I got here, but before you put anything in there, if nothing has been in there, you might want to get a flashlight and shine it in the end of your quill here and make sure you got nothing in there. No chunks of anything, because that thing should be clean at all times. There should be nothing in there. If there is, you can get like a Q-tip, or you know, use your imagination. You get in there some acetone or something, lacquer thinner, and clean that out best you can, and then put a very, very, very light coat of oil back in there after you clean it. You just want to make sure that's really clean. And then also, you can run your quill all the way out, and I already did it here, but and I'm out of spindle oil here, but I always put spindle oil on this thing on your quill. I got a little tiny bit left, I got to order some more. That's way more than you need. And wipe that off. And I got a nice dirty paper towel here, but I got a clean spot. and you can just make sure that that is all nice and oiled. Lightly wipe it off, so we're left with a nice light coat of oil on there. So our quill is oiled and we don't have to worry about that. And then if you got some rust out here, you can take your steel wool again and, you know, work on that, or your emery cloth after it's been used, and or some 400 or 600, and polish the end of that off and make it look nice again. And then also there's a oil hole here on this particular machine, so you can put some light spindle oil or something in there. If you got a dauber, nobody ever uses daubers anymore, they're just for looks kind of now, but with the live centers. But sometimes people use dead sitters. Excuse me. But oil usually sits in there if you're using a dauber. So alright, other than a little bit of light cleaning possibly, depending on, you know, how dirty your machine is, we should be pretty much set to fire this thing up. Although the last thing that I always do, and this may be different if you've, you know, depending on how your machine was maintained before you got it, I always like to plug it in and fire it up before I put a belt on there. And I haven't put my belt on yet, so I'll just crank my motor on and make sure everything works, make sure everything's out of the way. A lot of times you set these things up and you might put a wire in, you know, a different spot that it was originally, and you just want to make sure that first off your rear drive assembly is not in the way of anything. So there we go, we got it running, and we're spinning, and that should be good to go. And we'll just check reverse. Reverse works, it's good to go. Nothing's in the way, my wires aren't in the way, nothing's rubbing, so we're good to go there. I'm not going to put a belt on this machine today because my belt I had for it broke, and I can show you that right here. This was actually an old belt that I had. I respliced it. This is a really old belt, and it broke. I put new wires on there and everything, but this is the second time it broke. So I'm going to go to the auto parts store and get a serpentine belt for this guy, and I'm going to throw that on. If you have never done that, there's a couple good videos on YouTube on how to do that. I'm not going to go over that here today, but it's a nice upgrade. The only downside to it is to put them on, you got to pull the spindle, and you got to pull this shaft for your rear rear drive system. So that's how you get the serpentine belts on. To get them off, you can either take it apart again, or you can just cut them. They're relatively cheap. But there we go. So that's pretty much it. Alright, so there we go. That's kind of the gist of what I do to get one of these machines running. You want to make sure you go through everything, and number one is make sure your gears are all clean, and you can inspect for broken teeth then too. Make sure they're all clean and oiled, and make sure this whole machine is oiled. Every spot that needs oil should have oil, especially when it's been sitting for a long period of time. Clean your ways up. You know, clean your threading dial, your lead screw. Make sure that all that stuff's clean, and you should be good to go. It should be a serviceable machine then. You should be able to use it and not have to worry about you know, something breaking or not enough oil. But you know, if you keep up on your maintenance, you should be good to go. The only other thing, if you want to, you can go to any level you want to restore these things. If you're going to do felt wicks, a lot of guys do that and then they strip them down and repaint them. But if you want to do felt wicks, probably the number one wick to replace first, and it's not really a wick, but these way wipers, I would do that first. That's a good idea to do with any old machine. Second is your spindle wicks, and you got to take the spindle out to do that. A lot of times they're in okay shape, and if you keep them oiled, they'll be okay. But if you want a little bit of peace of mind, you can go, and I think they're pretty cheap on eBay, like 10 or 15 bucks for a 9-inch. You can get some spindle wicks. There's wicks all over this machine. A few wicks. The 9-inch isn't so bad. The 10-inch is a lot more, but the 9-inch has some wicks in the apron here, and then back in the quick change gearbox. But if you keep these things oiled, you shouldn't have to worry too much about it, and your machine should stay running for a long time. So I hope that helped you guys out a little bit. It gave you an idea of kind of some of the stuff that I do to make sure one of these machines is running properly when I get it, so that I don't have to worry about anything going wrong. And just give me a little bit of peace of mind that I've done some of these maintenance things to make sure that it's up to par and it's kind of where it should be as far as an old machine. Like I said, you can restore them or whatever, but this should be more than enough to get your machine running, and you can use it for many more years as long as you maintain it, and it'll be a nice machine for you to have. Alright, hope that helped you guys out. Be sure to check out all my other videos. I got a ton of them. A lot of stuff on lathes, milling machines. It's my little milling machine back here. And for all you subscribers out there, if you could see, my shop just grew another 5 feet in my basement, so because I put this machine here. So be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know if you got any questions. Till next time, be safe on your machines and shoot safe. I'll see you later. Thanks.